So one thing most people had, I think there was only like a handful of people, especially in this section, that didn't end up completing the pivot table assignment. So we're going to cover that, and then we're going to cover a couple of other kind of general topics, and then we're going to do a very, very brief review of the data model stuff from last week, because it's more important that we get hands-on discussion of it. So I just have a couple of the slides, and I'm just going to basically be throwing them up in front of you as the like, hey, remember we talked about this last week. So that is there. And then we're really going to go into the process of data modeling, which again, like I talked about last week, I find that topic to be one that is probably the most challenging for students, just because it's so new and it's so different than what you're used to. So I am a big advocate of you guys getting exposed to it as much as possible and having the opportunity to practice. So I feel like that's very valuable for you guys. So the agenda for today is we're going to go over the learning objectives. We're going to talk about the pivot table assignment, information literacy assignments in general, and that's especially important as the Excel analysis assignment is coming up, not this week, but next week, but still is something that you want to factor in. Course concepts in our life. It's a very weird sort of thing. I was talking with different people in my personal life, and I was like, it is a weird sort of thing how much this class crosses over with my life, and I didn't even realize it. Like, there are a lot of like different podcasts and different other things that like articles I'm reading or things that I'm listening to, and it's like at least 50% of the time I'm like, this is something that's relevant to the class, and it's like hands-on stuff. So I wanted to kind of bring some of those things back to you guys just to maybe get your brains thinking about it. And then databases and data modeling, and then just wrap up and then have a good Monday, I guess. So bacon, egg, and cheese on an everything beagle, right? I mean, just like, I'm sorry that I love this so much that this is like my moment for me, and you guys are just along for the ride. So the rest of the class is for you guys. Hey, I didn't make it. I just curated it, right? And then this reminds me of the graph that we saw with the cameras, where all of the different applications are just staring at a smartphone, accusing it of taking the jobs. So learning objectives for the day. So we're going to think critically about information technology and link-specific information systems. This is going to be more of a quick hits thought discussion. It's not something that we're going to go super in-depth on, but it is something that is going to talk about those real-world applications of the course concepts. So we're going to touch on both of those there. Kind of analyze some of the topics that we've been talking about the last couple of weeks. And then lastly, read a data model and then create one from a business case. So probably what I would say is more relevant for that is we will create one from a business case, and then we will discuss reading it so it makes sense to us, is probably the more accurate way of saying what the today holds for us. So pivot table assignment. So I would say, first and foremost, thoughts. So a lot of the student feedback that I saw, and mind you, this is a safe place. I am totally open to things. I didn't realize until last week when I was talking to a student where they were like, I cannot open up the red things that have stuff underneath. And I was like, oh, you can't? There is no reason why I would expect that, but that's a great thing for me to know so I can make sure that I'm delivering the PDF as well for Mac users. I think 2 students mentioned to me the, I don't remember which number it was, but like when you create the pivot chart, that there's a caret that shows up for industry that you can filter through, and you can do that in the Windows version, and in the Mac version, you can't do it. You kind of have to go a different route. And so I'll make sure that I factor that into the instructions. So those were the 2 things that I would say were structurally in error. I know that there was a lot of data. I know that a lot of people were like, holy crap, this is really big. This is scary. So what are people's thoughts now that we've gone through it? Good, bad, indifferent? Was it a waste of your time? Yeah. Oh, nice. Yeah. Oh, so you're supply chain? Nice. Okay. Yeah. The SLMA has a couple of pretty good things. I actually led a bunch of workshops for them last year. So yeah, and I would say pivot tables, lookup functions, and we'll touch on those in this class actually, and then also kind of logical functions are probably the three big like parent categories of Excel topics that I think are really beneficial for students in any discipline. Any other thoughts?
Just a good practical exercise.
Good practical exercise? Yeah, no, I mean, and it's like, it's one of those pieces where it's like, so my bias, like I really enjoy pivot tables now, but the first couple times I was exposed to them, I was like, this is stupid. And the reason why I thought it was stupid is because I had such experience doing data analysis, not using pivot tables. And pivot tables are so frustrating to me because I was like, but I want it to do this calculation this way and it wouldn't work. And I'd be like, you're stupid. I'm just going to do it my way. And you know, it's like that age-old problem of it's like if you are used to driving an automatic and you get into a manual and you expect it to drive like an automatic, you're either going to destroy the transmission and or have a really unpleasant time, right? And so for me, it was being able to be like, okay, I would not use a pivot table in every analytical situation, but there certainly are a population of times where it is very valuable. And we'll touch on that a little bit more in data visualization. We'll actually go and talk about some other tools, but I think pivot tables as an entry level tool in Excel are really helpful because they do let you tell a visual story with your data. You can also show change over time a little bit easier. And also, quite frankly, just as a pragmatic thing for you guys, like going back to what we were just talking about, valuable skills, like a lot of people in industry, literally, if they're like, do you know how to use Excel? And you're like, yeah, I know how to use Excel. Like literally the two things that they're going to ask are lookup functions and pivot tables. Like that's what it means to them. And I think that that is lunacy, that that is the only sort of set of questions that they're asking. But like I can speak to this of like dozens and dozens of people that I've worked with in going and getting different jobs in industry where those are like basically the two questions that come up. So at the very least, being familiar and confident with them are certainly a value add in a like professional setting, just from a, hey, I know how to do stuff kind of thing. So feel more confident. One thing that I am curious about, so I would say one of the struggles of this class on the instructor side is we have such a broad variance of people that have skills with Excel. We have some people that are high level skills of Excel, and then we have some people that have never touched Excel before. And so this assignment was really designed so that you could pretty much start off not knowing anything about pivot tables and really have some good like guardrails to go through it. But if you knew it pretty well, you could go kind of quickly through stuff and then get to kind of the meat of the DuPont analysis. So that's my intention when I created it. Is that a fair assessment? Should it be modified by any large amount?
Didn't seem particularly, I mean, challenging. Or like, I think there's only one step where I really felt like I didn't feel all that set up by the practice.
Okay.
I think it was just the data cleaning one. To go delete some stuff.
Yeah, I think that.
I
I think that one, and because a couple students reached out to me, I think that one is, and I would say also this goes back to the Mac issue with the chart not having the caret drop down. And I don't say this in any sort of like snooty sort of you guys should figure it out sort of way at all, because like the feedback is very helpful. But like I feel like sometimes as a student, and I was very guilty of this as well, like you're on a time crunch, you're doing something, and you want it to be literal. Like you want to read the line and know exactly what you need to do so you don't have to like go in different directions. And I think with the data cleaning one that you were talking about, a lot of the people that got a little bit stumped in that spot, and I obviously need to reword some things to set you guys up better, but the data cleaning is a set of steps that you do to accomplish a certain task. And the fact that the task was different, like you were deleting different things in the practice than in the DuPont, is I think where a lot of people got confused because they wanted it to be exactly identical. And when it wasn't, at least some of the students that had reached out to me. And so I think it is a good kind of learning experience in general. And this does not take away my responsibility for making that more clear, but it is a good learning experience in general when you guys have those things to not like be too micro and in it and be able to like step out for a second and be like, okay, what am I trying to do? Okay, what do I need to reset on? But you're 100% right. And that is something that will be adjusted. So that's not me like trying to remove accountability on my part. Yeah, and I mean, like, it's funny because, like, it's one of those pieces where it's like, it really does depend on the scope of your role in terms of like what you're planning on doing, you know, in your professional trajectory. But like, if you're doing any sort of analytics, and it doesn't have to be hardcore data analytics, it could be just analytics in the scope of accounting or finance or whatever else. But if you're doing any sort of analytics, data cleaning is really important to know. Having said that, if you're not, it is some amount of important for you to at least be aware of so you know what you're playing with, but it has like a variable quantity of how relevant it is. And like I could probably do 50% of an assignment on data cleaning because where it's important, it's like over 70% of what you're going to be doing, right? But then so it's hard to know. And so I think with that, it's one of those pieces where yeah, I want to update that assignment slightly, but the other piece is it's like, I feel like I don't want it to be terribly more because I want it to be a good intro to it. So anyways, well, I appreciate the thoughts on that. So is there anything that you guys wish would have been thrown into the assignment? Because there are a couple of other areas where that assignment and sometimes it's like you don't know what you don't know, so it's fine if there isn't anything. But if there is something in the scope of pivot tables, do you feel like you have blind spots or something that you wish had been covered? I can take silence for silence. I will tell you that there is one super, super cool thing that I figured out how to do with pivot tables like a year ago. It was dumb how exciting it was for me. And I'll touch on that a little bit. Yeah. '26. Yeah. So the question is just where some pivot tables had issue or error with after some of the data was cleaned. So it's hard for me to say without seeing specifically what you did, and obviously I'll be going through the grading process this week. But so kind of what I was touching on when I was talking with Connor is the data cleaning that you did in the practice assignment touched on deleting one specific type of data that was causing an error. And on the DuPont one, on question 26, it was basically, it was like, okay, so you have this weird thing. You have this negative that doesn't make any damn sense, right? And then it's like, oh, and then when you go and look in the core data, this is why, right? Like this is clearly something that's super weird. And I did not mean for it to be confusing, but like the next line or something else was like, delete all of the stuff on the financial leverage, I believe. And I mean, I don't have it in front of me, but bear with me, but it was like very specifically, and you needed to effectively delete all the negative things in financial leverage, which was like 16 things. And if you did that, it updated 26 correctly. And I mean, assuming you did data refresh as well. And then everything should be correct afterwards. Now, if you didn't do it correctly, I think for the most part, I can't remember if it's 27 through 30 that you'll have small errors on, or if it's just 27 and 28. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I'm not, when I grade things, I'm not hugely punitive. Like, it's not one of those things where like you get full deduction for an error here that carries through. You might have some sort of small deduction on the domino cascade, but generally speaking, so there's 38 questions effectively on that. There's 30 questions and then 8 screenshots. And so you get a point per one, and then I scale it to 5 points, which is what it's worth. And within the scope of that, basically, if you miss a part of it, you get some sort of deduction relative to how many, you know, because some of them are like 2 questions and some of them are 1 and some of them are 4 pieces, right? And then basically, if you have like a formatting issue or something else, you get like a 1/4 point deduction. So it shouldn't be hugely impactful. And if you want to connect after class just to show me exactly what you did, I'm happy to make sure that you're comfortable with it. Okay, so we've talked about a couple of the pieces, the data cleaning, okay? Were there any other major challenges? I know there were a couple of like Mac related things that we touched on, and I'll try to at least have like small notes about that so people don't like bang their head against a wall. But was there anything else that was hugely challenging? Most of the student feedback that I've gotten from this class, well, all of the sections that I'm teaching currently and previous sections over the course of the year said that the assignment takes somewhere between like 3 and 5 hours, you know, kind of full sitting. You know, I feel like that's pretty reasonable given the fact that it's a 2-week assignment. Not that you were working on it the whole 2 weeks, but it is something that you have a 2-week time block for. So I understand that we all have timing and everything else. And I understand that part of things, but beyond that, was there any challenges? Anything? Okay, cool. So we got the data cleaning and chart issues, and then takeaways. I would say, honestly, one of the things that I would hope you guys would be more comfortable with pivot tables. I think a very, very valuable thing for you guys is they are a great entry point for what the hell is going on. Like truly, they're a great entry point for that. Like you have a big data set and you literally are like, I don't know. Like, I don't know what's going on. And if the data is clean enough that you can actually do some stuff with it, you can throw it in there and see what's going on. Like what's going on over time. You have 3 years, like what's going on in different industries. And you can get the lay of the land of what data is relevant to a potential project you're working on or a question you're looking into. And you can at least get the lay of the land before you start spending a lot of time analyzing it. And that gives you a much better viewpoint, because otherwise, like a lot of people said like, oh, this data was like a huge data set. And it's like, okay, so there's 460 rows. And there were, I don't remember, like 6 to 8 fields, like 6 to 8 columns or something like that. And like the Excel analysis assignment that you guys are going to be working on some this week and probably primarily next week is, I mean, it's an order of magnitude of at least 50 times as much data. And it's not even a it's not even a data set that I would be like, oh, this is a data set that's like, I would just like, it's a micro data set. Like in any professional situation, it is very trivial. And so having something like the larger and larger the data set, it's just like numbers. Like you just look at it and you're like, what the hell is going on? I don't even have context on it. And there's no way for you, well, unless you are a very special person, there's no way for you to consume that and be able to come to any sort of conclusion. And so being able to throw it into this and be able to kind of categorize it by industry or by year, or even just looking at revenue and seeing that and seeing change, that is really valuable for you to start teasing out what direction you want to go. So I would say, hopefully with some of your comfort with the tool, you would be more able to kind of use it as an intro level tool. And depending on what you're doing, it might be your main presentation vehicle. So it has value there as well. Cool. And this one was real good. Not that I have to hate on Apple every day, but at least once a week, I have to do it. I also had a really hilarious one about like an Apple employee's name badge, and his name was Sam, and his last name was Sung, and it was like worst name for working at the Apple store ever. And I was like, this is good. This is just good. No, which one?
It's, I think it's for Surface, but they found a guy whose name is like
That's beautiful. I love hilarious like needling like that, right? Like it's just like, have a little sense of humor with it. Don't take yourself too seriously. Okay, so I wanted to like reset on this for information literacy. So with the information literacy assignments, there's 5 of them. And the first set were very much targeted at like, hey, let's think critically, right? Let's think outside of the box. And I would say the pivot table assignment does not. I mean, there were certain pain points or whatever else, but I felt like it was pretty transactional and pretty direct, right? And what I will tell you is the Excel analysis assignment is more of that first flavor. It is definitely much more critical thinking, awareness, things like that. I would say the data model assignment, which will be due week 8, similar-ish. And then the database assignment, which will be due week 10, is more similar to the pivot table assignment in terms of like transactional steps. Still valuable, but it's gonna hit on different parts of your brain. So I wanted to reset on this just because, as I had said before, people did very well, but there were a couple of kind of like, let's say, consistent misses that happened. So I just wanted to like kind of level set on that. So with the information literacy assignments, when we talk about critical thinking, you want to think about like, why are you doing this task, right? Like, how does it apply to the class? Like, clearly the people that created this class, Dr. Wagner, Dr. Gerbing, myself, like, we could have pulled that assignment if we didn't think it was valuable. We could have had you guys do something different. So we clearly said, you are going to do this thing because there is some value to doing it, right? So how does it relate to information literacy? How does it give you guys context on that? And then where does it relate to the course content in particular, right? So like, obviously the Google search and the data exhaust, you're talking about data exhaust, obviously. You're talking about function creep. You're talking about some of the data related kind of processing, gathering sort of things that exist. So that's kind of week 1, week 2 content, but that's kind of where it relates, at least to the scope of that assignment. And we could touch on other parts of the course if we wanted, but based on the timing of when we did it, having an understanding of where it relates, where it loops back to things, right? And so context is really important. And this is important in any sort of professional discussion or whatever else. So it's like, why the hell should I care what you're writing about that thing? Like, it's great that you were like, I went off the grid and it was hard to not pay with my credit card, or it was hard not using social media. And it's like, okay, that's, like a narrative version of a bullet point list of what transpired, right? And that's fine. Like, I'm not saying that that's bad, but how do you create context, right? And so context in this case is, again, relating it back to the course concepts, right? Like, how do you have it relate? How do you have it resonate? And obviously in any class, you're trying to demonstrate to me that you have understanding of the content and that you have mastery, right? Like, that's the goal. I would venture to say that everyone wants an A, whether or not it is viable based on all of the work and other things that people have. Like, I would like everyone to get an A, but I also have my responsibilities that there are certain marks that people need to hit to achieve that. But mastery in any sort of learning environment is important, right? So how do you show mastery and understanding? And so we're going to go back to our week 2 stuff. And so remember the data knowledge pathway, right? So data to information to knowledge, right? Like we talked about that. We've talked about that a couple times. And so how this relates here is, so if you tell me what happened, and then you tell me that a filter bubble is a bad thing, or a good thing, or a whatever thing, you are not showing me your pathway. You gave me the data, which is your experience, and maybe you gave it to me effectively, maybe you didn't, but you gave me the data in some way, and then you just gave me your opinion, which is effectively your knowledge, but you didn't give me the pathway. So why should I trust that your conclusions are accurate if you don't demonstrate how you got there? Right? Like if you were to ask me what my favorite movie was, and I was to just tell you my favorite movie without giving you the basis for why it was my favorite or any of these other pieces, it's just my opinion. I haven't convinced you. All you have done is probably judged my choice, right? Which is fine, but it's just like I haven't necessarily sold you on it, right? Like I haven't convinced you what went into the mental process to get there. Because the mental process is key. Because if I'm your boss and you're trying to tell me you came to this conclusion here, your pathway is more important than your conclusion. And your pathway is more important than your conclusion because your pathway is going to be how much confidence I have in your reasoning. And that's really important, especially in a professional space, because the decision maker that you're presenting to will always have more data than you have access to. By the nature of their position, they will have access to data that you don't have that may be relevant to the discussion, but because of your position, you just don't have access to it. And so it might be like company financial information that doesn't get released until a quarter close or whatever else. There are certain things that you will not have access to. If they have confidence in your knowledge pathway, then they at least can take the additional data they have and then factor it into your decision making and have confidence in what you presented. But if they don't know what the hell you decided on or why you did it, they can't really take that and adjust it based on what they know. So the pathway is super important. So you want to make sure that, like, I don't necessarily agree or disagree that a filter bubble is good or bad. I would contend that anytime you're trying to gather information, a filter bubble is bad because it means that you may not get a comprehensive look. But like a filter bubble is great if I'm shopping. Like I literally was like looking for like a board game course for my girlfriend's son to like be able to like learn how to play this game. And like the fact that I started searching for a certain game and then it started making suggestions for me of other courses that were related, that's great. Like that literally saved me time. That is valuable for me as a consumer. And that is literally no different as a filter bubble. It went and it assumed based on the things that I have searched, and it presented to me other things that it thought I was interested in. This is great, right? So again, going back to that technology piece, technology is just a tool. There's no goodness or badness of it. It's contextual. And so I support any of the conclusions that you guys come to as long as you support the conclusion itself, as long as you show that knowledge pathway. Okay. And just as a shout out for the upcoming assignment, it's really, really important because the Excel analysis assignment basically has 3 main questions that you're going to answer. And it gives you some kind of criteria as to how you're going to answer them. And you can pretty much go any direction. And that can be really scary, especially for accounting students that want things to be like delivered to them specifically as like do this, then this, then this. no shade, but I'm just saying, like, that is the most hilarious thing over the last year. It's like the level of agitation that a student has in like that assignment is directly proportional to whether or not they're an accounting student. It's like there's a strong correlation. And I'm happy to help. So that is not throwing shade, but I'm just saying it is really, really crucial that you're able to demonstrate your thinking and demonstrating your analytical process. Because this more appropriately than any other assignment in the class is the one that there's like not a right answer. Like, yes, you have to answer the 3 questions, but because there are so many different pieces of data that you can interpret, I would venture to say that you could answer every single one of the questions at least 10 different ways at minimum, right? And that is not to say that any one of them is right or wrong. Like, I might literally disagree with your thing, but if you support it well, I'm like, oh, okay, good, no, sure. Yeah. So just be very comfortable with what that is and kind of what we've talked about. Okay, so I'm pondering a thing, and I'm still pondering it. I don't have a definitive answer as to how I'm going to deliver this to you guys. I'm thinking I'm going to give one additional extra credit opportunity. And by and large, people love extra credit, whether or not they choose to do it or not. Like, I, as a student, like literally would drink at the fountain of extra credit. It didn't matter what a teacher said. Like, they could have been like, run your head against a wall 20 times and I'll give you extra credit. And I would have been like, how hard? And what is the composition of the wall? Is it concrete? Is it steel? Like, what, like, can I wear a helmet? But I would do it because like my goal is always to have maximum points before I go into the final so I can have minimum stress. All of that being said, I'm not 100% sure how I'm going to deliver this extra credit opportunity. I will know more next week, and it won't be due till like probably like week 9, so I can grade it. But it's going to have some sort of relation of tying in course concepts to real life stuff that's going on. Because I think that gives you guys a pretty good holistic view of like what's going on, what we're talking about, right? So some of the things that may show up on the final may show up on this extra credit assignment, but things that I think would be relevant for you guys to be thinking about. So the idea of a monopoly versus network effect, right? We talked about this a little bit in class, and a lot of people were bringing this up in some of the forum discussions and things like that. But they feel similar in some places, and yet they're, from a governance standpoint, different. So having a good idea of what those two things are and how they relate, or how they're similar, how they're different, I think is very valuable. Having some thoughts on both. So censorship versus a filter bubble. So like, again, a lot of times with technology, it just comes back to like, how aware of it are you? Like, I know I have a huge data exhaust. I'm kind of okay with it. It freaks me out that companies are collecting my data. So like, and using it for potentially nefarious purposes. So I have my credit frozen so no one can screw with my credit without me unlocking it. So there are certain like things that I have taken as like safe, steps, but like, I also understand that it's happening and there are benefits to me as well. So censorship versus a filter bubble. Like, when we go and search stuff, like, we expect to get an open answer, right? And I think one of these things that actually was popping in my head, I was talking about this a couple days ago, was just the idea of like how we search for stuff is different now than 5, 10, and even 20 years ago. Like, before, you would search for like one specific thing that you were interested in. You were like, oh, is this Surface coming out? Like, when is the date that the new Surface is coming out, right? Like, you would search for a specific thing. And like, now, with how we have smartphones and how we use stuff, like, it's almost like we use search as our memory. Like, we don't even take the time to remember something because we know that we're going to have access to Google or something else, and you can just search it, and you don't have to even retain it. So it's like we almost use search as an extension of our brain, and if that's the case, it becomes really important that we're getting accurate inputs from that. So just as something to think about, like how are they similar, where, why? Is there a time where a filter bubble is good? Is there a time where a filter bubble is bad? Why? Like if you're looking for a restaurant and, you know, like Google or whatever else knows that all you want is Thai food, that's great. Randomly, like it's good, you know, but randomly, it's one of those things that you don't think about till it starts happening. But when I was working to develop the blockchain program or this blockchain certificate, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I would work a specific thing doing like advising and curriculum development. And there was a specific file in my Google Drive that I would open. And at a certain point after like a month, it was the first file. And it would always say, do you want to open this file? You normally open it at this time. And I was like, I do, but I don't want you to know that. Like I don't want you to like it was one of those things where it was like, that's super convenient and also creepy. But it's like, you know, it's just like really random things because it's like, but if you think about it, the fact that for someone who's unorganized with where they store their emails or where they store their files, it would be highly efficient if you, rather than having to go look around for something, it was just the top thing on Tuesday and Thursday. You need that thing. Okay. So I had this thought, and this was something that was really interesting that a lot of people wrote about. So a lot of people did the Google search assignment and they got kind of different results, right? So like say, Giovanna, you have your friends, you search or whatever else, and like they get mostly the same results, but not the same, right? Like kind of thing. And a lot of people would say to me like, oh, there's no filter bubble. Now, again, I'm not in an argumentative sense, but so think about the concept of the freezing point. If you were to Google freezing point of water, we would expect everyone to get the same result. It is 0 degrees. If you got something different, that is weird, right? Like that is objectively weird. That like sometimes you have a concrete answer, right? And so it's one of those things like, why are we comfortable saying that because it was mostly the same, a filter bubble doesn't exist, right? And I'm saying it more from like a thought perspective because like I was like thinking about that, and then I was talking to a bunch of different people in my life, and they totally would have said the same thing that you guys were saying, which is like, oh yeah, I don't expect the search to be the same. And then I was just like, well, why is that? And like, are there things where we would expect it to be exactly the same? And like, so it's just one of those pieces where I think we don't think about that as much. And so like, even just within the context of a filter bubble, like if you were looking up like best restaurant, like that's clearly an ambiguous question, right? And you getting something different than me or whatever else, like even if we got kind of the similar things, you probably be like, oh yeah, it's similar. And there's a few like random minor details or whatever else. But like if you search freezing point of water and you get like Wikipedia and some other things, and then I get like something totally different, that's weird. Like objectively, that's weird, right? And so there are some searches where we're more comfortable with it being different and we rationalize it, right? And it's just like, it was just interesting because I hadn't even really thought about it, and I've been grading this assignment for over a year. So it was just an interesting thing that kind of popped in my head where it's like, what does our comfort with the result like do to bias our perception of things, right? And just even thinking about that. So data value to corporations versus the consumer. So we talked a lot about the data that corporations are collecting last week. And I think a lot of people were a little bit, you know, freaked out in certain ways. And I mean, me too. So I'm not, no judgment. But so like a question that kind of branches off of that is, okay, should data be monetized? Should Google get our data for free? Okay. Now you can go and say, no, Google shouldn't get our data for free. Okay. And we should be compensated for it because it's clearly valuable to them. So we should be able to accrue some value for it. Okay. But then what is the like unintended consequence of that, right? So if our data is monetized, what is the impact to the company and what is the impact to the consumer? So if Google had to pay us for our data from the get-go, would Google have been able to provide the services they did for free? Probably not, right? Because they would have had to have been paying for that data. So, and that's the entire backbone of what they're able to do, right? So how would that service exist, right? And then also think about like the fact that like Google became so powerful and a staple of all of our lives because everyone was using it because it was free. And then they had so much data going into their algorithm that their algorithm was better, objectively, than all of the other search algorithms, and especially better for us because of all the stuff they're curating for us. Well, if they hadn't had that, groundswell of data going into them, then it wouldn't have gotten as good, and it wouldn't have been so impossible to compete against. So imagine if 10 years ago or whatever else, if you had to have an account with Google and you had to pay $10 a month. Would you have used Google or would you have used a different search engine? I would have used a different search engine. Like, I refused to even give my credit card information to a company and then sent them a very angry email last night, even though it was like a free 30-day trial or whatever else. And I was very salty about how they communicated it to me. But it's like I was not even willing to give them my credit card information and not pay for a thing. So I certainly wouldn't have been willing to do that with Google, like whatever. And so then the question with that is like, okay, so how does that impact us in terms of what services we get? Like, would I pay $5 a month for Instagram at this point? Maybe, because I really like memes and it'd be convenient for me. I could go get them somewhere else, but I'm kind of lazy. So it's like, but it's like, but the question is that network effect thing where there's friction for me to leave, right? So my answer is based on the fact that it would be convenient for me to stay. Would I start paying $5 a month for that service not knowing? So the fact that our data isn't monetized lets companies like Uber or Lyft or Airbnb or all of those other companies gather the things that allow them to be competitive and break through into the marketplace. And the fact that that data is free for them means that they can focus their resources in breaking in against established players. And would they be able to do that if they had to pay for it? I mean, maybe, maybe not. It depends, right? And so those are some different pieces that kind of relate directly to the class. So some additional topics that I was reading or podcasting about in the last week and a half that were so interesting. So first of all, political data and geofencing. So I had never heard the term geofencing before, so it was new to me. But basically, so this is a crazy, crazy, mind-blowing thing. So there was, in Texas, there was a bunch of people that were informed of this free, like, Willie Nelson concert, whatever. And they had and a company unrelated to anyone had geofencing set up around, which allowed it to capture all of the data from cell phones. So they could capture all of the location data that people were there. And then they were able to use that and then sell that to different political campaigns because they were able to be like, oh, people that are at this concert are probably interested in these things. And then they were able to target those people. And it is even more like crazy than that, where there are political campaigns right now that are going and they're collecting so much data that they're like, Allison likes this, this, and this. So when we come to Allison's house to ask her about what she wants to do with this political campaign, we are going to send her a person that looks exactly like someone that she likes, that has interests similar to her. We are going to have 100% alignment to make sure that that moment is as actionable for us as we want. And they're collecting all of the stuff. And it was just, what in the hell? Because the thing that was even crazier was it wasn't even someone had signed a thing. Because we all sign the waiver. Like, use my data however you want, whatever, right? Like, use my cookies, whatever. At the very least, you've clicked that. Whether or not that's ethical or whatever else is a whole different discussion. But you've at least actively clicked a thing and you know that stuff is going on. These people just showed up to a place and someone had basically set up a digital perimeter that no one knew was going on to collect all of the data. Right? Mind-blowing, right? It was super, super interesting. And it was also like freaking 1984 stuff going on. And then, oh, medical data lawsuit. So I can't remember who it was. I think it was Ani who was talking about this last week, where we were talking about, like HIPAA protected and FERPA protected data, and like, okay, so data brokers can get certain data, but maybe they can't get other data. So this is something that I received. It was so clairvoyant. It was so appropriate. So I received this over the weekend, and it was like, oh yeah, apparently there was some sort of like data breach in Primera. And I was like, a Primera, like that was my healthcare provider like a decade ago or something like that. But there was some sort of data breach. And so they're like, oops, my bad. There's a bunch of people whose medical information is just out there. Sorry about it. We'll give you credit protection for a couple of years if you want. Like that was their settlement. Now, I say all of that to say like, okay, so let's say Connor is Axiom. Now he can't actively collect federally protected data, right? Because it's federally protected. But once it's out there, he can probably buy it. And if his goal is to have all of the data about all of the people on all of the topics, he probably is going to buy it, right? And so I'm not saying that Axiom is going and hacking something to get it out there. But once it's out there, right? It's Pandora's box, right? So it's just one of those interesting things where there certainly are a large group of data that are protected, and yet people still have access to them, for better or for worse. So how many people in the room, just by a show of hands, speak multiple languages? Okay. And so, by the way, I just want to do a shout out. Everyone that is learning in not their native language has nothing but respect from me. I was quasi-fluent in Spanish in high school and then didn't practice it for forever, and now all I know is my profanities. So I can definitely insult your mother or your family or your friends. I'm not going to, but I'm just saying that is basically the list of things that I have. Now, I bring that up because, so language prediction. I was thinking about this. We get a free subscription to Grammarly by being through Portland State. And so that's kind of cool, right? And then also some of the times where you're typing something, like especially with my, I think it's my PDX email, my Google will like predict certain things, right? And like, it's great when it says like, oh, you said attachment and you didn't attach a file, because I am notorious for like forgetting to attach the file. But machine learning is an interesting thing because we rely on it. And without going into too many of the details, the way machine learning works is you take this huge amount of data of all of these different conversations and all of these different pieces, and then you try to make predictions off of that, right? And I don't know how much people have paid attention, but one of the things that Grammarly is doing right now is they are trying to determine conversation tone. Has anyone noticed that? Yeah, no? Okay. Well, so on Grammarly, like on the very bottom of your PDX email, if you have it like installed into Chrome, it will have a little icon that has like a little like face or something else. Like, was your email like stern or like regulatory or friendly or whatever else? And it's like, but then it has like a 5-point scale. So it'll have like 2 or 3 like kind of emoji-ish sort of things. And then it'll say like scale of 1 to 5, how strongly you were doing that. But the thing is that next to it, it asks you to vote as to whether or not that was correct. And the reason why it asks you to do that is because a machine learning algorithm needs data and it makes a prediction, but then it needs you to validate whether that was correct. Now, I mention all of that with like language prediction. So for those of you that English is not your native language, I'm sure you've used like translators. And how often are they wrong? Yeah, right? Like, I mean, like, and there are plenty of times where it's like, it's not something that you did wrong. It's just that like the transition from English even to a closely affiliated language, let alone a very different language. But there's like context, there's tone, there's all of those different things, and that they change around, right? And so this is a very interesting topic just because we we rely on it so much without realizing it. Like think about like when you go into a search with Google, like how often does it predict the like next thing that you want, right? And some of that is due to things that you've searched, and some of that is literally their machine learning algorithm that basically is saying, like, they're basically doing a statistics game. And they're saying, like, most of the people that have typed in this word and then part of this word are actually interested in this. And then as you change it, it's updating on the fly. But all of that is only possible by them collecting the data on everything that we're doing. Right? And then the last one that was super interesting last week. So I don't know if people are aware of some of the, let's say the lack of racial support. I realize this is gonna go in a direction that seems possibly questionable, but the lack of like racial support for visual recognition things. I'm not sure how many people are, what is it, the Kinect? Yeah, the Kinect. So when the Microsoft Kinect first came out, it wasn't able to see people that had dark skin because of how their like color perception was on the sensors. So it's like if you were relatively dark skinned at all, it couldn't even see you. You were a ghost to it. And so obviously that's one sort of problem. And then things kind of evolved over time, obviously, and that's something that companies were working on addressing. But one of the other things that was really challenging is, in terms of facial recognition, a lot of facial recognition software would be highly, highly accurate with people that are not minorities. And then it was very inaccurate for people that were minorities. So it might be like 99.9% accurate for me. But then someone who was maybe African American, maybe Middle Eastern, they might be only 80% accurate. And there was a wide variety of reasons why that happened. But one of the things that was very interesting is, I believe it was last week, it was in the last 2 weeks, the Google Pixel 4 was announced. And one of the things that they announced with it was the fact that it could do 100% accurate facial recognition in the dark. So it meant no amount of like color bias, no amount of anything. So that's like really, really cool. Like that's an awesome thing. And then I was actually reading some articles about it, and it became super questionable how they were able to do that. So they basically went to a third-party contractor that was going all over the US, all over the world, and collecting data from people and not telling them how they were going to use it. So they literally were like, hey, I don't even remember exactly what they said, but it's like, hey, we're working on this project or whatever else, and we're going to give you like a $5 gift card to Starbucks or something like that, and we just want to like take a picture of your face. Like I'm serious. Like that's literally what it was. It was like they went and they did that. They wanted to take a picture of your face. And that's how they were getting, going back to the machine learning, that's how they were getting enough data to go into their algorithm to then be able to predict things accurately. And they didn't tell anyone what they were doing. And now there are millions and millions and millions of people's faces that Google has, and Google has data control of. And like, again, going back to the idea of like unintended consequences or technology not being good or bad, I would say there being no racial bias for facial recognition is a good thing in general. But then the question is, how did they go about collecting the data? And then the other thing is, how is that going to be used? Imagine if Google was to share that with like a government agency and that allowed them to specifically target certain communities. That would be terrible. So it is a good thing in a micro sense, and then you start having to ask, like, how did we get there? Was it ethical? Was it good? How are we going to use it? So it's just very interesting. So regardless of what directionality I go for giving you guys an extra credit opportunity, it will probably be some sort of thing covering topics like that I pay attention to. But I think all of those things are very worthwhile for you guys to at least be aware of and be thinking about. I think that will also test your critical thinking muscle. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, I got a whole list. Yeah, I will definitely. There's one called Reset that just came out. If you want to get super techie, there's Recode Decode. That one's good too. But so this right here was one of the most amazing things that happened this year, possibly this like millennia. So Google came out with a quantum computer. And they were able to answer a computational problem that should take 10,000 years, and they did it in under 4 minutes. Without going into too many details, quantum computing is basically what they have been talking about in the tech side of things for probably 15 to 20 years or so, as like, this is the way that we get past Moore's law. Obviously, in the chapter that you guys read over, like Moore's law is happening, but it's kind of slowing down. And there are different physical limitations that are basically going to have it stop at a certain point. And a quantum computer is just so much more computationally powerful for a variety of different reasons. But I thought about this also. So this is cool. This is amazing. And this is truly going to be transformative for us in terms of what we're able to do, like in science and research and things like that over the course of the next 10 and 20 and 30 years. But the interesting thing, going back to like the data question that we were talking about, so if Google had to charge for their service from the get-go, they wouldn't have gotten strong enough, large enough, that they could have invested billions of dollars researching this, because this was an over 10-year project. And so it's like, it's a really, really interesting sort of thing where we don't think about what some of those secondary consequences are. And then, I mean, like, do we really want Google having a supercomputer that like could like Skynet the world? Like, do we really want that? Like, I mean, they're already gathering all of our data without asking. And now do we want them to have the ability to process it in an even different like way? I don't know. Like, it's really cool that we have this ability to do these kind of scientific tasks, but what are the consequences? So anyway, so that was the functional meme that I brought to the table today. Okay, I am just going to click through this, and I'm going to go very fast because we already talked about it last week, but this is just to set the stage. So we talked about laundry, because I'm unorganized with my laundry. We talked about emails, because I'm better there. And really, the whole point of a database is structuring our data in an organized way that's efficient, that we can gather effectively later. So it's how do you store it as efficiently as possible, which means making the best use of the space, and how do you make it where you can find it when you need it quickly and easily. Okay, so we got database, data management systems, SQL. So those were kind of backbone terms that we were talking about. So database terms, and these are very important. Oh, I wrote a thing for you guys this weekend. Like, I wrote basically like 8 or 9 pages of like database related explanation stuff, and I'll post it on D2L, but I just thought it would be helpful for you guys. So, so yeah, so that's there as a resource for you guys. But basically you have tables, which are kind of the grouping that all of your data is stored in. You have entities, which is a specific type of table. You have, it kind of works. I need to change the batteries. So you have fields. So fields are the same as attributes, the same as columns. You kind of intermix the terms, whether you're talking about databases, data models, or just kind of data itself. So the field is describing a specific thing about your entity. So maybe it's address, email, name. A record is just a row. So John Smith here would be a record. Sally Jackson would be a record if we had more people, so on and so forth. So We talked about two things that we want to avoid with databases. We want to avoid repeating groups, because if Sally has 8,000 birds, like my dad's ex-girlfriend, that's a problem. And that creates a lot of wasted space. We also want to avoid redundant data, because again, if Sally has 8,000 birds, now we have 8,000 different rows for Sally. And that means that each Sally Jackson and address here is just redundant, right? So now you've taken all of the characters that occupy that space times 8,000 of waste. So a primary key is a unique identifier. It's necessary for every table. It can kind of take on a variety of different methods, but generally I like to use like abbreviation of the table name and then ID. So it's like customer ID, employee ID, order ID. I'm just lazy. The foreign key is the kind of the linking mechanism that allows the two tables to talk. So the foreign key will exist on the many side of a table relationship, and it links back to the primary key on the one side of the table. So here we have our one table, and it's our customer table. We have our many table, which is our pet table. And the customer ID, the PTR, and the abbreviation here is just pointer. So PTR is basically telling you that that column is pointing back to something different. It's not necessary to have it set that way, but sometimes that helps in a somewhat dumb way to remind you what it's doing. But basically, this is the foreign key column. And so this pointer customer ID is literally pointing back to customer ID. And so this foreign key is going to link back here and allow these tables to talk. So when we talk about relationships, we basically talk about one-to-many relationships or zero-to-many relationships. Technically, there are many-to-many relationships, but they screw the database up. So if you have a many-to-many relationship, you have to go and say no, and you have to figure out a way of resolving that. But the relationships are really the most important part of the database, because that allows you to do stuff. If you just had a bunch of tables that weren't connected, it's not going to be very helpful to you. So this table is like gold. And I know that it sounds stupid, but you really should, like, anytime you are doing a database, like data modeling related thing, you really should have this table in front of you, and you really should say it out loud to yourself. And I know that that sounds so dumb, and I'm sorry that I don't have a better way of doing it, but the reality is you just have to do it to be able to identify whether the like relationship is one to many and then many to one, or like how it sets up. Because you need, anytime you're establishing a relationship, you need to know the scope of the interaction from A to B and the scope of the interaction from B to A. Because that's basically how they're talking, and that is going to determine whether or not you need to make some adjustments. So data modeling is the intermediate step between you as a business professional and a database creator. So understand that, like, Carter is like the smartest computer scientist in the history of the world. He's like the DBA for the company. He's just everything. But he doesn't know his head from his feet about the business situation that we're going to be doing. And so if I, as a business expert, can't come to him and give him something that's like, this is what we need, and then he can go and say, ah, yes, I will structure the database in such a way that it will do those things, you have garbage and you have problems. And that's where you get really dirty data. That's where you get stuff that doesn't work. So data modeling is an effective intermediate. It is where a business professional can go and say, I know what the business is and I know what the business wants to do, and I'm going to communicate it in some sort of structured fashion to this other person so they can do the very back end task. So it is an intermediate thing, and it is very, very important. I would say it is the larger takeaway for you guys when it comes to database related concepts in this class. So we talked about that. And yeah, so data modeling uncovers the structure of your data. And that's also can sometimes be really helpful as like an exploratory piece where it's like, oh yeah, does this need to be grouped here or there? It can be pretty helpful as you kind of move through stuff. So these were some of the, I don't even know if like terms is the right thing, images basically, I don't know. But you basically have entity name. This is going to be a table in a database. You have identifier, unique identifier, primary key. You have attributes, which are descriptors. Likewise over here, notice that you have the one side over here and you have the many side over here, which is indicative with the crow's feet. And the many side will always have the foreign key that talks back to this unique identifier. The vertical line corresponds to 1, and the 0 correspond, or the open circle corresponds to 0. So if it was exactly 1, as it shows here, it's just going to have the vertical line. If you allow it to be 0 or 1, it's going to have a vertical line and the circle. These actually are very interesting questions that there is not a right or wrong answer, and this is the reason why a business professional has to do data modeling. Because, so think about this for example. If you were making a data model for a business and you were going to have a customer table, does a customer have to have an order? Like this is a question that you would have to establish as to what you want your business to do. Now, I tend to agree with Carter. He said it doesn't need to have an order. And I think that is smart because then that means that you can have a customer and you can get them into your rewards program. You can have their information. You can be having all of that stuff. Maybe you can start pushing advertisements to them that will get them to make a purchase. And if you say that you don't store that person's information, if you say you don't store their data or anything else, then unless they have made a purchase, then you've closed off an entire group, right? But that is a relevant business question to ask. So these kind of 0 or 1s are very, very important, and they are different depending on what you want your business to do. So it's not that there is a right or wrong answer. It truly depends, and I understand that that is annoying, but that is the reason why business professionals have to do this exercise, because you have to be able to say, like, what do you want to get from this? Do we want to click? And then we kind of had just a step through of our process. So identifying the entities, the relationships, figuring out kind of what tables are talking and then how they're talking. Find the unique identifiers, set the foreign keys, and then identify the attributes. I think that is the last slide for this. Okay, so that is all of the reminder stuff. So Megan, I think I'm not going to be able to help you because I have to use the camera and I don't think it displays to Zoom. So I will be posting this later if I can get this to work. So I just wanted to let you know.